Guys, welcome to the I Love CVille Show. My name is Jerry Miller. Thank you kindly for joining us. We are live in Charlottesville, the Commonwealth, the country, and the world on the I Love CVille Network. Today's show is jam-packed like a can of sardines. We will talk Marc Woolley and his interview with Bloomberg Law, the interim city manager who took the job at the city of Charlottesville, then quit before his first day on the gig, telling a national, in fact, a global publication that Charlottesville, Virginia is crazy town. That topic on today's edition of the I Love CVille Show. UVA increasing tuition for the next 2 years. Increasing tuition where if you're an in-state student, the total cost of everything to attend the University of Virginia in 2021-2022, $34,560 roughly, $70,000 roughly if you are out of state. So much to discuss with that topic alone, in particular how it's going to impact Charlottesville and Central Virginia from an economy standpoint and from a housing standpoint. I also want to talk some football today. Brennan Armstrong says he's returning. I need to correct myself. Brennan Armstrong says he's not transferring. He's going to test the waters to see what his NFL draft stock is like. And if his draft stock is quality, he's going to turn pro. But what he's not doing is transferring to another college or university. He's either staying in Charlottesville or he's going to play on Sundays for a professional paycheck. We'll talk Anthony Poindexter getting demoted at Penn State University and South Dakota teachers mosh pitting for $1 bills at hockey games. Yes, you heard me correctly. Alex Urpí, it's Tuesday, will join us, the CEO of Emergent Financial Service. So much to cover, guys. Give the show a like and a share anywhere you are watching, just like Scott Aaronworth, the attorney, the Esquire, the lawyer from Virginia Beach. Scott Aaronworth, we love you when you watch the program. Skooma Boutique Dispensary, certificates of analyses for everything in the stores. Skooma Boutique Dispensary is Charlottesville, Virginia's best dispensary, and it's located on the downtown mall next to Rapture. The first topic I want to cover today is Marc Woolley. Marc Woolley is the former interim city manager of Charlottesville, Virginia. Marc Woolley interviewed for a deputy city manager job here in CVille. We have a number of deputy city manager jobs that are currently open. And when Chip Boyles quit as interim city manager, remember John Blair was the interim city manager. We love John Blair. Now the city attorney is Stanton. JB, you're A+ people. Love you, John Blair. When John Blair, the interim city manager, resigned, Charlottesville went to an interim city manager in Chip Boyles. Then Chip Boyles unexpectedly resigned because of the toxicity. What's the word? Toxicity. Thank you, Judah. Judah Wickheimer is our director. Due to the toxicity of working with Mayor Nikiah Walker. That's literally what Chip Boyles wrote in his resignation letter. So city council said, good night, good Lord, ay mi madre, we're in trouble. And then they said, in the process of interviewing people for deputy city manager openings, Marc Woolley, who applied for a deputy city manager opening, has some experience running jurisdictions. So we're going to make Marc Woolley the interim city manager. Marc Woolley took the job and said, I'm excited to come to Charlottesville. My family's super excited. I can't wait to get to work. Then, before he even gets on the job, Marc Woolley pieces out, hits the road jack, and quits. He quits before his first day on the job. He initially, in a letter to Nikiah Walker, the mayor of Charlottesville, he said that he's quitting because this is not a good fit for his family, old Marc Woolley. Then, in an interview with Bloomberg Law, I'm going to read you verbatim. In an interview with Bloomberg Law, a global media brand, Mark Woolley, the interim city manager, said this, quote, "There's just no way that an interim person can work underneath that craziness." Exact words. There's just no way an interim person can work underneath that craziness. They have to have a person who's permanent to deal with all the issues that are swirling in Charlottesville, Virginia. Those issues, a lawsuit from the former police chief, those issues, a lawsuit from the former city manager, those issues, attrition and vacancies all over City Hall, those issues, Nazis in court for their role and impact on August 12, 2017, those issues, affordability, those issues, gentrification, those issues, numerous, many, plethora and plentiful. So I want to, hold Mark Woolley accountable. And I agree with what Carol Thorpe. Carol, are you watching the show today? If you're watching the show, Carol Thorpe, let me know. Carol Thorpe has this comment. I think Carol Thorpe offers great perspective. Mark Woolley is exactly right, of course. But she says Mark Woolley is a lying weasel coward for not being man enough to state so up front instead of blaming his decision on a lack of good fit for his spouse and children. The city is an unworkable mess, and fortunately for us, some of that craziness leaves office on January 1, but still, dear CVille, in the end, he just was not that into you. She continues in a different comment, and Carol, I think you're absolutely on point here. My point is that he should not have accepted the job in the first place, feeling the way he did. Blame his failure to report to work one day in advance on a lame excuse, dragging his family into the mix, then spill the beans in an article later on. It does not make him look good whatsoever, and in my humble opinion, calls his integrity and decision-making into question. Character matters, and if this is the sketchy, perhaps CVille did well not to consider him for the long-term give in the long run. Carol Thorpe is watching. Hello. Carol, I 100% agree with your comments. Old Mark Woolley, as Bloomberg Law dubbed him, big law alum, old Mark Woolley took the job as interim city manager of Charlottesville. There was a lot of pomp and circumstance, a Zoom press conference, a meet and greet for the media, where questions and answers were answered virtually. Mark Woolley, in this pomp and circumstance press conference in Q&A fashion with local reporters, was eager to get to work. And Mark Woolley said, "My plan is to be the permanent city manager after a proof of performance as interim." Then hours before his first day on the job, old Mark Woolley resigns. And Mark Woolley, the scapegoat of his resignation, was his family, his wife, his offspring. Charlottesville, in fact, is not a good fit for my wife and my offspring. That's what he says in his resignation letter to Mayor Nakia Walker. Leaving Charlottesville in a bind. Again in a bind. Then old Mark Woolley chooses to do an interview with a global brand, Bloomberg. And old Mark Woolley, in this global branded interview, calls Charlottesville crazy town and says there's just no way that an interim person can work underneath all that craziness. They have to have a person who is permanent to deal with all the issues that are swirling, end quote. And as Carol has identified, I think your perspective on this is 100% right, Mrs. Thorpe. As Carol has identified, Mark Woolley is not wrong, but his mythology and how he managed the perception of his hiring and resignation was, in fact, incorrect. You don't accept a job. Give your word. Character matters. My dad taught me character is the one thing in life that no one can take away from you, but you can absolutely give away your character. And when old Marc Woolley says, yes, I'll take the job, and then resigns hours before the job actually starts and places the resignation blame on his children and his wife, and then a couple of weeks later talks to a global media outlet and calls Charlottesville crazy town, that's an indication of shady, shoddy character. You blame your wife and your kids for not taking the gig, and you quit before the job even starts. And then a couple of weeks later, you throw shade and talk smack about the town that you were going to represent and call it crazy town. That is, at best, terrible perception management. And that is, at worst, character flawed reasoning. Crazy town. I know it's crazy town. We all know it's crazy town right now. We all know it's crazy town right now. But to go and throw shade is unnecessary. All right, let's talk increased tuition. First-year students at the University of Virginia over the next couple years will see tuition increases. For the 2022-2023 school year, for the 2023-2024 school year, we will see tuition increases. 4.7 increase base tuition upticks for 2022-2023. 3.7 increases for 2023-2024. I'm going to put in perspective how much this is, and then we will assess the impact it has on Charlottesville. Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to hang tight over there, that's good. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, in the 2021-2022 school year, room and board and other expenses, $34,560. $34,560. Undergraduate students, $70,000 for out-of-state students. $70K. That means if you're in-state for the 2021-2022 school year, and this is before the upticks, this is before the increases. 2021-2022, $34,560, everything included. Room and board, tuition, other expenses. Out-of-state students, 2021-2022, $70,000 for out-of-state students. UVA announced that they're going to increase the tuition in 2022-2023 4.7%, basically 5%. In 2023-2024, basically a 4% increase. So those numbers will uptick. Next year, everything is basically $35K for in-state. Next year is basically $70K for out-of-state. And those numbers will go up. What's the impact this has on Charlottesville is what we should be asking ourselves. I understand UVA is in the business of making money. It's a business, and I have no problem with businesses charging what they are worth. One of the biggest mistakes that entrepreneurs, especially early stage small business owners, make is not charging or not billing their value. It took me a while to realize this. 13 years, 14 years on May 28th for me as someone who's self-employed. We have 3 businesses we run out of here. Real estate, 24 tenants, this podcasting network, and a brand management company where we build brands and drive incremental revenue and new customers to our clients. When I started, the idea was to get clients and to get traction and momentum. So you often, upon launch, undervalue yourself, undervalue the skill set you provide. As you get clients and as you show proof of performance and as you drive revenue to your partners and as they stay loyal to you, you realize that, hey, I'm damn good at this. I'm damn good at this. And I can say, not from a cockiness standpoint, but from a confidence standpoint, that there's no one in a 50-mile radius of Charlottesville, Virginia, that can do brand management, marketing, and advertising better than me. And I know it's a fact, and so do you guys. As I've grown as a businessman, I realize not every dollar is worth the same. Some earned income requires much more hand-holding and effort than other earned income. Furthermore, as I've grown as a businessman, I realize the necessity of valuing your skill set at the right clip. UVA is a world-class education. I have no problem with the University of Virginia in the 21-22 school year having an all-in nut of $35,000 for students, room and board and other expenses, books, living expenses, $35K for undergraduates. Out of state, all-in nut, $70K for this coming school year. Those numbers will increase basically 5% in 2022, 2023, and basically 4% in 23, 24. I have no problem with a world-class institution charging, valuing at this frequency or this clip, this monetary clip. What I'm going to do now is try to assess and analyze what rates like this will have on quality of life in Charlottesville and in Central Virginia. When undergraduates in this coming school year are dropping $35K for in-state or $70K for out-of-state, you're likely going to have a student body whose moms and dads and families have resources, means, money, cash, green, moolah, dinero. When those rates uptick 5% and 4% over the next few years, the necessity for money, cash, moolah, green, dinero is prioritized even more. You have 25,000 undergraduates and graduates here. When they're paying clips like this, they have disposable income. So the collateral damage or the cause and effect from my standpoint is this. Landlords know that they can charge more from a rent standpoint. If you're paying $70,000 a year as an out-of-state student, you're probably not going to bitch and moan about $1,600, $1,700, $1,800 a month beds. Restaurants and retail that cater to students can increase their prices. And as 25,000 kids, students, undergraduates and graduates spend 4 years undergraduate, 2, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years graduate school here in this community with their wealthy mom and dad's bank accounts at their disposal, this will undoubtedly positively impact the economy in that there's money in here that are going to small businesses and that cater to students. But it will undoubtedly negatively impact the affordability index of the city of Charlottesville and of Albemarle County. When you have students who can rely on their wealthy parents to take up rental housing opportunities, those rental housing opportunities that go to these students of means and resources will certainly cannibalize and replace the opportunities afforded to locals who may not have the means and resources the students' parents do. You get 20, 25,000 students with means and resources, and you get a clash of students and townies in the resources they have. You raise the cost of tuition and yearly expenses, you're going to get a wealthier demographic attending UVA. And as a wealthier demographic attends UVA, and it's compounded by out-of-market companies opening up headquarters in the city, Dexcom. We reference a number of out-of-market headquarters now open in the city. And as those out-of-market headquarters open in the city of Charlottesville to cherry pick and poach the talent that's matriculating through the university, those out-of-market new companies bring people in from outside the area. So here you have a clash of KPIs, key performance indicators. Wealthier students coming to Charlottesville, 1 KPI. UVA indicating they're going to admit more students than ever before, 2 KPI. UVA admit that they're going to hire more employees than ever before, 3rd KPI. Out-of-market companies creating headquarters in the city of Charlottesville to poach the talent that's graduating from the university, 4th KPI. Out-of-market companies creating headquarters in the city of Charlottesville and bringing in their talent from outside the market as opposed to training it from within the market. 5th, 6th KPI. This creates an affordability index that's less approachable and tangible and more expensive. And everything I just outlined to you is undoubtedly factual and based on a reasoned foundation. It's good for the economy, but it's not good for those living on fixed income. These 5 or 6 KPIs I just identified are a version of gentrification. Gentrification is not just increased taxes, pushing fixed budget homeowners out of their neighborhoods. Gentrification is a 10.2 square mile city becoming a hotbed for technology, for finance. And that's what Charlottesville has become on the East Coast. All right, a couple more items. Alex Urpí is going to join us on the show here in minutes. A positive story. Governor Ralph Northam. This in the Daily Progress by Allison Rabel. will provide residents in 13 Central Virginia counties with access to fiber broadband internet. Central Virginia will receive $79 million in federal and state funding. 13 counties, Albemarle, Amherst, Appomattox, Buckingham, Campbell, Cumberland, Fluvanna, Goochland, Greene, Louisa, Madison, Nelson, and Powhatan. I'll give them to you again. 36,283 underserved homes, businesses, and locations. Albemarle, Amherst, Appomattox, Buckingham, Campbell, Cumberland, Fluvanna, Goochland, Greene, Louisa, Madison, Nelson, and Powhatan. All these counties will receive an allocation from $79 million. Ralph Northam and the Commonwealth of Virginia. This is phenomenal news. I've said on this program that quality internet is a utility now. And for the haves to have A-plus internet and the have-nots to have shoddy internet, that furthers the wealth gap and divide. This $79 million federal and state allocation, without question, will drive housing values in Albemarle, Amherst, Appomattox, Buckingham, Campbell, Cumberland, Fluvanna, Goochland, Greene, Louisa, Madison, Nelson, and Powhatan. Would you buy a house if it didn't have quality internet available? Probs not. Probs not. Now $79 million from federal and state funding allows those unstable situations from an internet standpoint to uptick in value. Kudos and props to Ralph as he heads out of office with Governor-elect Youngkin set to take over on the 1st of January. Ralph makes this announcement on the 14th of December. The governor of Virginia, Ralph Northam, he has done nearly a 180 since the blackface yearbook photos have come out. Nearly a 180. The management of the pandemic, the $79 million allocated for broadband in Central Virginia, these are how we're going to remember his term and his tenure, because they happen at the end of the term and tenure. And that's, as humans, what we remember the most, what's most fresh. Football. Brennan Armstrong is not transferring to another college. Brennan Armstrong may play for a paycheck on Sundays. Brennan Armstrong is gouging or testing his NFL draft stock. Brennan Armstrong will not transfer to another college. So our fear has slightly been alleviated. I said this last week on this program. I don't think Brennan Armstrong's going to be a first or second round draft pick. I think Brennan Armstrong is a phenomenal quarterback. I think he's a winner, a leader. I think he's tough as nails. I think he's a gamer. I think he's a baller and a hell of a college player. I'll compare him to Bryce Perkins. Bryce Perkins was the quarterback before Brennan Armstrong. Bryce Perkins was the best athlete on the field. Bryce Perkins was a UVA record holder. Bryce Perkins flirted with ACC records. Bryce Perkins, Dr. Bobby Chabra came on this show, orthopedics UVA, one of the best surgeons in the world. He said Bryce Perkins had a level of athleticism that he'd never seen before. Perkins can't get off the practice squad with the Rams. Can't get active on a roster in the National Football League. He's a practice squad player. Making a roster as a quarterback in the NFL is brutal. How many teams in the NFL? 31, 32? each team carries what, 2-3 quarterbacks on the active roster? You're talking 62, 64, less than 100 quarterbacks on an active roster if they have a third string. I think we're going to see Armstrong coming back next year. And to reinforce his return, my advice to the university is to keep Jason Beck, the quarterback's coach, and Marques Hagans, the wide receivers coach. My advice to Tony Elliott, and I understand any head coach wants to fill staff with his own men and women. Jason Beck, the quarterback's coach, is a kindred spirit with Brennan Armstrong. Brennan Armstrong, yesterday in the press conference, was literally campaigning for Jason Beck, the quarterback's coach, to return to Charlottesville for next season. He literally said, bring back Jason Beck. Marques Hagans, Biscuit Hagans, the wide receiver coach, should also return. Biscuit Hagans is a Hampton High graduate, a Hampton crabber. He is the wide receivers coach, and the wide receiving core this past season was one of the biggest strengths of the team. I would love to see Beck and Biscuit and Beck and Biscuit back in business. Biscuit and Beck back in business for next season. Tony Elliott, please. 2 more items before AU, Alex Urpí, the Antonio Banderas of finance. Antonio Banderas, I think one day, Alex, and I know he's listening in the green room over there, I'm going to have a cape, a mask, a hat, and a sword for you on set. That would be awesome. Anthony Poindexter, I think, just got demoted at Penn State University. James Franklin, the Penn State head football coach, hired Manny Diaz, the former Miami head football coach. Manny Diaz got canned, pink-slipped, fired, let go from the University of Miami Hurricanes. He immediately signs a contract with James Franklin and Penn State and the Nittany Lions to be their new defensive coordinator. So here's what happened to Anthony Poindexter. Anthony Poindexter was rumored, scuttlebutted, to be the next head coach of UVA football. Poindexter rumored, scuttlebutted, to be the next skipper. That job ends up going to Tony Elliott. Poindexter chooses to return back to Penn State. Whether or not Poindexter was a legitimate candidate for this job, Dr. Carla Williams, the athletic director, is one of the few people that will know. It seems because he was scuttlebutted and rumor milled to be the new skipper at UVA football that James Franklin got a little sour, because now Anthony Poindexter goes from co-defensive coordinator at Penn State, a job he held with Brent Pry, who's now the head football coach at Virginia Tech. He went from co-defensive coordinator this season to safeties coach next year. We're common sense people, right? People ask, what political party do you most identify with, Jerry? I most identify with the political party of common sense. We're common sense people. When you go from co-defensive coordinator to safeties coach, that's a demotion. And that's something you will have to speak about or for on your resume if you try to climb the vertical ladder of professionalism. Poindexter, who I was very excited about, may have played this game of political professional chess incorrectly. Last one before we get to Alex Urpí, the Antonio Banderas of finance. This is a crazy story. South Dakota teachers competed for $1 bills on a hockey rink, literally in mosh pit type settings. Sioux Falls, South Dakota, this past Saturday night, at a junior hockey game, $5,000 and $1 bills was dumped onto a carpet at center ice. 10 local teachers were then positioned on their hands and knees on the carpet. The money, $5,000 and $1 bills, was dropped onto the carpet on center ice from above them. A jam-packed arena in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, during intermission of a junior hockey game, watched as 10 educators on their hands and knees mosh pitted, clawed, fought, scraped, elbowed, and eye gouged. $1 bills, they couldn't even hold the bag, $1 bills into their shirt. They put the $1 bills under their shirt and try to scurry away with singles. Who's on the single, Judah? A $1 bill. Franklin's on the 100. Alex.
Washington.
Thank you. Man's the CEO of a finance company. Thank you, Alex Urpí. That's why you can trust Emergent Financial Services. He knows El Presidente on the $1 bill. George Washington is exactly right. That is just a terrible look for these teachers. 10 teachers on their hands and knees at a junior hockey game, mosh pitting with helmets, hockey helmets on, for loose chain, for single dollar bills. It's just a bad look. I feel bad for the teachers. We shouldn't have to ask or encourage or even invite the people that are training the next generation and say, get on your hands and knees and mosh pit for $1 bills as an arena full of fans chant and cheer and heckle you on. This is like Russell Crowe in Gladiator screaming to an arena, are you not entertained, as he's fighting off lions with a wooden sword? Oh, I feel bad for the teachers. It's not a good look. I feel bad for the educators. They should be highest paid, not lowest paid. All right, let's get Senor Urpi in the mix. Senor Urpi, I'm a little behind time, and I apologize. AU, if we can get you on set from the fabulous green room. There he is. He's looking sharp. Is that a new watch, Alex?
Nope, same as always.
I like it. It's a very nice watch. Was that a gift from Pops?
Yep, for 21st birthday.
Very nice. A good timepiece.
Each son got a watch.
A good timepiece lasts a lifetime.
It does. It'll last forever.
My friend, hello. How are you?
I'm doing well. How about you?
Doing well. It's good to see you. I love Tuesdays with you.
Just got to say on Judah's behalf, the man is probably doing so well with his investment portfolio that he probably only deals in hundreds anymore. He probably goes into Troder with that 2250 and he's like, I only have 100. Do you have change for 100?
I think that's the case, isn't it, J-Dubs? That is the case. That is the case. All right, so I'm going to throw this to you, my friend. Tuition increases at University of Virginia. $70,000 a year for out-of-state students. This is where I have a feeling you're going to go the value proposition.
Of community college.
70 G's for out-of-state?
It's a lot.
Dude, you're coming out, quick math, $280K potentially in debt, $280K out of pocket, and it's upticking 5% next year and 4% the year following. Anywhere you want to go on this topic?
No, I mean, it just goes to show you it is the race and the inflation rate among four-year institutions in particular has been extremely high. I mean, it's outpaced, that we complain about inflation now, that number has outpaced inflation by, it's massively. And I forget, this was even years ago, it was running at about, it was like a 300% increase over like the last 2 decades or something. And so that number has always been increasing very rapidly. And so it just sort of drives home, at least for me, the value proposition of in-state. In other words, make sure that you encourage your children to look, as exciting as it is, right, to say, oh, I'm going to go all the way off to a different state to go to college. Have your kids look at the value proposition of community college, followed by transfer to an in-state four-year institution if you're going to go the college route, not to dismiss trade schools, which we talked about on a different show, but just to think about, have your kids really begin thinking at an earlier age about the financial cost. Because sometimes when you go to college at 18, the only thing you're thinking about coming out of high school is, this place looks really exciting, or the thing I really want to do, this school is great at, or I can go to this school, that looks like fun. So you need to really sort of instill in them, even at an earlier age, almost like your dad did with you, the value of money, and to say you have to weigh what you want to accomplish in this college that you want to go to with the cost of that. And sometimes the answer to that might be, you know what, it's better for me to stay in state and take those savings and know that I'm starting off on a stronger financial footing when I come out of college.
It's a no-brainer. It's a no-brainer. Son of a CPA, my brother and I, son of entrepreneurs. He had the Wall Street Journal or a newspaper with stocks that we had to pick. The value of money was instilled to us at a very, very early age. What's the impact you think that has on the community? You have a bunch of students, especially the out-of-stater. I mean, hell, even the in-staters, my friend.
The in-state is up to what, close to 40 now?
Close to 40K. I mean, 35K, and it's going up. Mm-hmm. What's the impact you think that has of having so many wealthy kids, so many wealthy students? I'm not using the word kids, that marginalized. So many wealthy students in one community.
In one community. I think we are seeing a little bit of a lot of these colleges, I believe, are beginning to go to more of a bifurcated model. And what I mean by that is, bifurcated usually means you separate something in two. And I think what they're doing now is increasing tuition and providing a lot more low-income scholarships. And what you're going to have with that is a lot fewer kids coming out of middle-class families, probably more kids coming in from low-income families.
That's a good
great
take.
For them.
That's a good
and
take.
More kids coming from high-income families who can afford the very high rates that the very high tuition costs we're talking about. In terms of here, I mean, already this past year, I was hearing from real estate agents saying parents, just the very wealthy parents, are willing to shell out for their kids to stay in an apartment somewhere around Charlottesville rather than a dorm. Granted, first year has no choice but
First year's on grounds.
First year's on grounds. But after that, I heard from some real estate agents even this year who were talking about saying these apartments, especially on, I think this one was on like Jefferson Park Avenue.
JPA.
On JPA. You're talking, he said that thing was gone in a day because the parents are like, I don't care what it costs. My kid is going to stay at this apartment, and just have a clause, one of those escalation clauses that goes up 3-4 times. And it was out within hours that the thing was sold. And so what you're going to see is the more of that, you're just going to see, again, I think probably real estate close to the university in terms of rent, probably going to go up. Some of the other amenities on the corner probably going to become a little more expensive because your clientele there has now changed from middle class to low income, right, who may not have been purchasing from you anyway, and much higher income because they're the only ones that are going to be able to afford the cost of out-of-state tuition with no scholarship.
That is a fantastic take. Alex Urpí, CEO of Emergent Financial Services. The secondary effect, the second order impact?
Second order, I mean, once you go out further, right, increasing rents means that you now are attracting even higher clientele. It's sort of like one of those snowball effects, right? Because when you push the middle class out of an area and you put a upper to higher class into the area in terms of wealth.
I would say this is very much upper class.
This is very much upper class,
yeah.
Right? You now have created a scenario whereby the only people being attracted to come who can afford to come to that small area is upper class in the first place. So it kind of self-reinforces. In terms of everything else, I mean, you probably just expect prices to go up slightly more as well. You have more buying power from that group, right? So if you're a seller here, you say, well, I can make a little more because that's who's doing it here. I suspect it'll be concentrated a little bit more around the university, but then you expect it to probably increase a little bit, going further away. I wouldn't say it would contagion into the whole area, that suddenly everywhere prices increase, because if you're pushing middle-class residents out of the central area of Charlottesville into Albemarle, into the surrounding counties, they're not going to be able to afford those. They're not going to push up their prices. Those prices will kind of stabilize. But in the middle is where you expect just the rents probably to continue to increase, and then everything that comes along with that.
I love it. I love that take. I 100% agree. I would even say third order would be this. The jurisdictions, Charlottesville and Albemarle County, will see the uptick in rents. You can uptick rents if you have a huge throng or flock or gaggle of students in one area that have deep-pocketed parents. With deep-pocketed parents, you can uptick the rents. Then that means the jurisdictions will uptick the taxes associated with the real estate, because the taxes and the people that say this is going to be the tax rate will be like, well, look at that investor and how much money he's making on this piece of property. And that's going to have a trickle-over impact on real estate, not only around the university, but as Alex has identified, into Albemarle County, and that is how gentrification is expedited.
And my concern with that is property taxes. I think sometimes it's difficult to realize how dangerous that is, because if you think about, let's say you own a piece of property already. Let's say you've already been living in Charlottesville or Albemarle County, right? And house prices start going up tremendously. That in and of itself doesn't force you out of the area. To just make your home is more valuable. You may sell your home, but one of my things with gentrification is gentrification never bothers me if it means that people who were living there
have more equity and now have sold. I don't begrudge a low-income person who happened to have a house in Charlottesville and sold out for $1 million and now went to go live somewhere else, and the person who came in happened to be a higher income person. Like, that's great for the person who sold the house. My concern is on the property tax side, because you have a person who owns a house. Let's say it's been their family for a long time, right? But they may not necessarily be high income. They have this home, but their income may be fixed, especially if they're a senior. It may be on a fixed income. And now the property taxes jack up, and they sit there and say, I can no longer afford to live in this home. I have no choice but to sell it and to move out to the area. That's what concerns me. I have no problem if someone living here, I'm like, all power to a minority business owner who's got a little house in town and says, hey, it's worth $1 million. I want my kid to inherit $1 million. I'm going to sell now while the going's good. My concern is the person who doesn't want to sell. This house has been in my family for 2 generations, but I have no choice but to sell because property taxes just got jacked up on me and my income is fixed. That, I think, is a greater concern that can sometimes be missed. We see the rising property values, but we miss the fact that the rising property taxes is what can force people out. Because if your income is unchanged and those taxes go up, that can be a big deal, combining higher taxes, higher rates with higher appreciation of the home. Well said. That's a phenomenal take. Alex Urpí, CEO of Emergent Financial Services. I believe you may have picked up a new client this morning on Real Talk. I don't know if Nick told you here. Christopher Eagle, Yes Realty Partners, Emergent Financial Services.
Come talk to us.
Let's make that happen. Let's make that happen, C. Eagle. All right, so comments coming in for you. Vanessa Parkhill, hello. Kevin Hagans, hello. Kevin, we'll get to your comment here. James Watson, we'll get to your comment. Carol Thorpe, we will get to your comment. Scott Aaronworth, we will get to your comment. Give the show a like and a share anywhere you guys are watching. Bill McChenzie, hello. Ray Cadell, hello. Juan Ciramento, hello, and welcome to the show. So this is from Kevin Higgins. Kevin, I love when you watch the show and you contribute, Kevin. I sincerely mean that. How does investor confidence levels in administrations impact the markets, specifically the White House?
Well, that's a good question. I might change a little bit. I think I'm not sure investors ever really have confidence per se in an administration. I think what investors want to see is certainty. And so ironically enough, predictability. And ironically enough, I think investor confidence increases when there is kind of loggerheads, because that increases the odds of nothing happening.
So loggerheads, he's saying a divided Congress, divided Senate, Republican in the White House and Democrats in Congress or the Senate.
Exactly.
Because you can predict nothing's going to happen.
Exactly. And I think that, ironically enough, increases investor confidence more so than saying, oh, we think...
one aisle government.
Exactly. Because, I mean, as much as I think investors probably have different goals, right? As an example, investors on the corporate side always want lower taxes, right? That would lean them towards a Republican. Investors on the corporate side, they tend to like its more expansive Federal Reserve. Democrats tend to appoint more expansive Federal Reserve individuals, right? So the two things would be opposite. So the investors would never be able to say, oh yeah, I only ever want blue in the White House, or I only ever want red in the White House, because there's things they're going to want from each one. Divided government provides, for a lot of times, investors in the market that sense of, at least I know what to expect next year, because the odds of something major, paradigm changing, passing is more limited, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I think it's overlooked sometimes that not doing a bad idea can be just as valuable as doing a good one. And you kind of learn that in finance too, right? Not pulling the trigger on a bad stock idea can be just as valuable as pulling the trigger on a good one. And I think investors kind of see that as well and say, well, divided government sometimes, yeah, it may stop some good ideas, but it'll also stop some bad ones from passing.
How do we characterize what governmental administration now and the influence or impact it's having on markets?
Well, I mean, the two major impacts right now is inflation, which no one seems to have an answer for. Either the administration or the Federal Reserve really don't have anything to offer on inflation. So that's the major impact now. And then the second one, obviously, is just continued Federal Reserve and Treasury policy being clearly low rates and some tapering. And those are the two biggest, I'd say, economic impacts coming out of the White House right now. The infrastructure bill ended up not being, it's not a major passage, and the larger one, the 3.5 trillion, which would have had a lot of different things in it impacting the markets, doesn't seem likely to pass right now. So I think given that the major changes there don't seem likely to pass, what we're left with is inflation, which really, I mean, there's not much coming out of there as being suggested as what can be done there. And Federal Reserve policy, which we've discussed before, that really the Federal Reserve has no interest in raising rates, and they're just going to let their bond purchases taper off. And to be clear on tapering, sometimes I think people have this impression that tapering means like they stop buying. It's like, no. They stop reinvesting the massive amount of bonds that they already bought. So yes, their balance sheet is shrinking, but it's shrinking from a very high level when they purchased a bunch of bonds in the past.
Kevin follows up. We have multiple questions here for Alex Urpí, CEO of Emergent Financial Services. What does the fact that the Fed has no answer on inflation tell us as potential investors?
For me, it tells us that we need to be a little wary of anytime they use the word transitory, because they don't know.
Are we, and I don't mean to, I'm going to stop here. Are we past the point of describing inflation as transitory?
I mean, at what point, right? Because
it's been going on for a while.
Yeah, at what point, I mean, it started rising early this year. I mean, a year in, do we still call it transitory?
Right.
I mean, or is it like
here to stay?
It's a year's worth of inflation that's here and has impacted people's pocketbooks. And the issue at this point is clearly the Federal Reserve has said we are not going to use any tools that are known in the past to reduce inflation.
For example?
For example, raising rates. That's the number one, right? In the past, Federal Reserve raises rates and they pop the inflation bubble. Now that has its own repercussions, right, which they clearly do not want to take on, but they're clearly...
Its own repercussions are making it more difficult for people to get into home ownership.
That's one of them, and depending on how much they do it, that's a major repercussion. Second repercussion, oftentimes it will slow down the economy intentionally. Third repercussion, which is not supposed to be on the Fed's mind, but clearly is it will jack up the interest rate that the government pays on debt. So for those reasons, they're not going to pop the bubble that way. And so we're kind of left sitting here, I think, as the investor, and you've got to make a decision saying, how much do I think that inflation is going to go away naturally? And what I mean by that is
cost of goods start getting stabilized.
Exactly. Either because people stop buying or the supply chain issues begin to resolve. The supply chain is external. The consumer beginning to increase their expectation of inflation is internal, and that's self-reinforcing.
What does that mean?
So
they just get accustomed to the price increases?
You begin to expect higher price increases. We kind of talked about, I think, before, that sort of vicious cycle of, I think prices are going to be more expensive tomorrow. I buy it today. Prices go up.
Christmas gifts.
Exactly.
What just happened?
Exactly. And I think we saw the end of last week that, in fact, consumer inflation expectations have increased dramatically. And unfortunately, economics shows us one of the factors that pushes up inflation is itself the expectation of inflation. It's one of those weird psychological impacts that it have. And so the concern is which of those is going to dominate more. If the supply chain is the dominant factor of inflation, then as soon as you resolve the supply chain issue, inflation goes away. If inflation expectations and sort of that wage price spiral becomes the dominant factor, then there's not a guarantee that if you fix the supply chain issue, you get rid of inflation. And the problem is right now, there's no way of knowing just which of those is going to become more dominant.
You're the expert. I just have a microphone. I'm going to ask you these questions. Supply chain crunches or supply chain pinches. One of the reasons or catalysts for these pinches, labor shortages. Mm-hmm. One of the reasons or catalysts for these pinches, increased fuel costs. One of the reasons or catalysts for these supply chain pinches, transportation issues. Mm-hmm. A lot of goods, merchandise.
Shortage of
truckers, stuck on barges. We've all heard the stories of boats just circling in the ocean and not docking, and that's why everyone had to rush and buy Christmas gifts, and then they emptied shelves, and it created this like toilet paper bananas situation like in the pandemic when we all started buying Clorox and toilet papers, and then there was none, and then prices went up because there was none. I would think, I don't want to assume, I want to think that the labor shortages eventually are going to work themselves out. People are going to have to get back to work. I want to think that the transportation issues will eventually work themselves out. I want to think that the demand from consumers will eventually flatten come January, February, and March when credit card bills come due and everyone spent a boatload of money for the holidays. Am I reading this wrong?
I don't think you're reading it wrong. So I'll take each one individually because I think each one's slightly different. Supply chain, in terms of labor shortage, I would agree at some point you
gotta get to work.
It has to happen, especially since it's been a little inexplicable because one of the major factors that just rationally would keep people out of work, which was the extra unemployment on top of your typical unemployment, is gone now. So you'd sit there and say, well, from a rational perspective, even if you thought beforehand, well, I'd rather stay home for $40,000 a year than go to work for $60,000 a year, that's gone because you're not going to make $40,000 a year anymore off unemployment because the extra has been taken away. But we still really haven't seen a large return. So it's a little unusual. My suspicion is at some point, if people are living off their savings, that is going to dwindle. And you're going to have to begin to make the decision, I need to get back to work in some way, shape, or form. So I think that will slightly resolve. The energy prices, also that's a little more difficult to say because looking at it purely from a demand perspective, the demand is not really the issue with energy prices because we're not even back to 2019 demand, and yet oil prices are higher. So the issue is as long as OPEC kind of holds the cards right now on oil, and unfortunately I don't think the strategic reserve opening, that's going to be a temporary blip, but they're going to close that at some point. The United States is not going to drain its entire strategic reserve for 6 months of oil price relief. So as long as OPEC holds the upper hand there and can constrict supply, that's going to be an issue. So that would require the United States probably to begin pumping more again and making a deliberate decision to do the opposite of what we've done in the last 12 months and say we might have to pump some more oil ourselves just to make sure OPEC does not hold all the cards there. And I'm not sure that'll happen. So oil is a little trickier to know if that will resolve the price of oil. And then the third piece, which is demand, I agree. I kind of hope it doesn't. I mean,
because you want the economy to recover to pre-pandemic levels.
Exactly. You would rather inflation be resolved by fixing the supply issue than by hoping that demand decreases again, because then that opens up a whole nother set of issues. Then we'll be talking 6 months, not about great resignation, but people trying to find work.
Yeah.
So I would hope that is not the catalyst for demand, for inflation to decrease.
What do you think about this from Mr. Henderson? I'm not going to do you a disservice by mispronouncing your first name, sir. I'm going to call you Mr. Henderson, and I appreciate you when you watch the show. He says, gentlemen, and I mean this with respect, you guys are foolish to believe that prices will go back down. Once the prices go up, they never go back down.
Okay, so he is correct. We're not talking prices going down. That would be deflation. What we're talking is inflation going down. So inflation is the rate of increase in prices. So in other words, 5% inflation every month means every month prices are going up 5%. Just as an example, we're not at 5% month to month. We're like 0.1, 0.3. That's a high number, but it's not 5. Just as an example, I'm using 5 to say 5% inflation means every month the price increases by that.
That's substantial.
That would be substantial.
Yeah.
When we talked about inflation decreasing, what we mean is that future prices do not rise. Not that prices decline.
Thank you.
Prices declining would be deflation, which you don't want either. Deflation usually is a recessionary sign.
Exactly. And I don't mean to interrupt, I'm going to get out of your way here. He may be, and I'm trying to use context clues here, he may be saying the cost of a gallon of milk, and I'm simplifying it, is not going to return to the price that it was a year ago. Mr. Henderson, what he's saying is, it's not going to continue escalating month after month after month after month. It will just stabilize at its current rate.
Exactly. So inflation, as an example, if inflation drops to 0% and stays there for the next 10 years, our current price level is where it's going to be at. In other words, the price of the gallon of milk that went up this year, it's staying there for the next 10 years if inflation goes to 0%. So that's just to show you what happens. And I agree, I do not foresee a price decrease in the horizon. However, I don't think that's necessary for things to improve. And what I mean by that is typically a temporary increase in prices, which stops and then stabilizes, isn't as bad for the economy as an ever-increasing price level, ever-increasing inflation, because you have a temporary bad year, right? If you just think about it from a consumer's perspective, this year was really tough because my wages haven't yet fully increased, but the price of everything went up. Now, starting next year, my wages have to increase a little bit, which we're seeing. Companies are planning on paying people more next year, right? And if inflation stops happening, if inflation decreases, thereby stabilizing prices, you can now begin to plan ahead again and say, okay, I have a reasonable expectation of what it will cost to feed my family in 2022. Inflation that's ongoing is very dangerous because it means that going into the future, the money in your pocket becomes less and less and less. And we see this in financial plans, right? If I run a financial plan for someone to plan for their retirement, and I include a 5% increase in prices, which then stops, usually they look pretty good way out in the future. What kills them is if there is inflation of 3% every single year, because that means every single year, if they do not earn more than 3% return on their investments, their savings are in fact shrinking because the amount that they have to spend is rising at a faster rate than their savings. And that's what you don't want to see. So as much as it's painful this year to see this increase in prices, if it stops and then inflation goes back to zero and in 2022 we have no inflation, that's not the end of the world. What we do not want to see is that in 2022 you have 6% year over year. So in other words, it's bad enough that we've got 6% year over year from 2020 to 2021. If next year we start seeing prices in 2022 being 6% higher than 2021, that's when you have a very serious problem. Because now you have long-term inflation, which is just shrinks your savings. It shrinks your savings, it shrinks your wages, your real take-home pay. That you do not want to see. So that's, when we talk about inflation declining, that's what we're hoping for. We're not under, I highly doubt that prices themselves will decline.
Alex Urpí, CEO, Emergent Financial Services. CEO, Emergent Financial Services, guys. Absolute rock star individual here. To dot the I's and cross the T's on this, Morgan Stanley CEO James Gorman told CNBC on Monday that the Fed should raise rates to combat a future downturn in the economy and to slow inflationary times. That a topic for another day. Why don't we close with this? I want to get perspective on today, Mañana. I got a 1:45, which is in 5.5 minutes, that's going to come in here on set to do an interview for their brand. Nice. I got two questions for you first. Okay. Why the chop in the market and the hope that I had for a Kris Kringle Santa Claus rally is getting a little concerning right now.
all right, I wouldn't get too down, right?
Okay,
The market's looking a little choppy the last 2 days. Mostly, I think there's just a little bit, again, your typical concerns. The wholesale inflation year over year hit 9%, which has never been recorded before.
I don't think this is Omicron that's causing this chop.
I think it's more inflation than Omicron. Because even though the WHO head came out today and gave some Omicron warnings, there's been a lot of polling released that I think the average person is not really
worried about
responding
Omicron. Right.
negatively to Omicron. So I doubt that more so. My suspicion is more that it's again, inflation creeping in and saying, 9% year over year on wholesale prices. So that's not even retail prices. So wholesale is what Kroger, your Kroger gets everything from before they sell it to you.
Right.
Seeing that increase at an never before seen rate was probably concerning to the market. I wouldn't lose hope completely on the Chris Crandall rally yet, only because we are still in the phase where the major 401ks and index funds are going to have to begin rebalancing and putting more money in. And that, let's just say that does, I think Nick, my brother, mentioned that that's also called a whale rally. And the reason it's called a whale rather than Chris Crandall is because those funds are so big that they dwarf the movements of individual investors
Retail
like
investors.
you and myself.
Yeah.
Like we could be panicking. We could all be panicking about the market. You, Judah, and myself all be panicking and sell everything. And one fund says, oh, now a lot of people did a nice little 401k contribution at the end of the year. I have to go out and buy stocks, and they will push everything up. So they dwarf us in size. So there's still that kind of pressure there. And even with today's, I think we're still not even in correction territory. So, I mean, I think it's concerning to see just because we're so used to green.
I'm very used to green.
We're very used to green. I mean, the last 2 years, we've seen a lot of green.
We've seen a lot of green.
So red looks kind of scary.
You're saying we're a little spoiled right now.
But I think we're a little spoiled.
We're a little spoiled
Exactly.
right now. Alex Urpí, Thursday with Today y Mañana. Thursdays, this network, Today y Mañana, presented by Emergent Financial Services, Alex Urpí, the closer, Xavier Urpí, behind the scenes, the ninja, Nicholas Urpí. Can't wait to see you one day, Michael Urpí. What do you got planned for Thursday?
Thursday's going to be a blast at 10:15. So we're going to have, actually going to be super informative. We're going to have a case study.
Ooh.
That I am going to basically, almost like a financial life case study, that I'm going to basically have a story of a small business owner of a certain age with or without kids, right, who is trying to get a picture of their financial life and advice from 3 perspectives. We're going to have Xavier's perspective from the financial planning investment side.
Okay.
We're going to have the advice of Christelle Noel, State Farm agent, from the insurance side.
Okay.
And we're going to have the advice of Keith Smith.
Whoa, it's from the real estate side.
From the real estate side. So they're all going to be here, and we're going to basically say, this will be your chance to sort of listen in and say, all right, if I'm approaching these financial experts, how does the process go? What are some of the questions that might be asked?
That's big time.
What are some of the solutions? So it's going to be a major financial case study with real estate, insurance, and finance covered.
That is brilliant. Whose idea was that?
To be honest, it was a combination. Christelle and myself sort of came up with that one, and then we said, who better to rope in than Keith?
He's willing. He's up for it. That is brilliant. It's Thursdays at 10:15 a.m. Today y Mañana, presented by the best, Emergent Financial Services. Find them online, Emergent Financial Services. Guys will grow your wealth and stabilize your future for retirement. My friend, you kicked it. You kicked ASS. I'll just leave it like that.
You
You're
had
fantastic.
great questions.
I loved it. I thought today was excellent.
You threw me nice little balls for the
I
home run
try to do that. I try to do that for you. You won the home run derby.
Thank you.
Yeah. Alex Urpí, good stuff. 90 seconds left in the program here, Judah. If we can go back on the one shot, we will see you Thursday, my friend. Scott Aaronworth, the attorney from Virginia Beach, just informed us, and he's exactly right. Jelani Woods, the 6'7", 260-pound tight end from UVA, has announced that he is turning pro. Jelani Woods, our tight end that was first team All-ACC, declared for the NFL draft about 56 minutes ago. Thank you, Scott Aaronworth, for dropping that knowledge for us on the show. So Jelani Woods, who I think is going to be a stud pro with that size, those hands, and that quickness, he is declared for the NFL draft. Jelani Woods with a social media post about 56 minutes ago. This is the I Love CVille Show on the I Love CVille Network. We are grateful for you watching, for you listening, and for spreading the gospel that is the I Love CVille Show on the I Love CVille Network. Tell a friend, tell a family member. Good to see you. We will see you on Thursday, my friend. Tell a friend, tell a family member of what we're doing here. We showcase the best of Charlottesville, Virginia on social media in approachable fashion. Have a good afternoon. We will see you tomorrow at 12:30 on this network. Take care.